Children. So welcome back to classes after a long time again, and in this class today we will discuss about the Egyptian civilization. So what is its name? Egyptian civilization. So in previous class you have studied about the Mesopotamian civilization. So what is Mesopotamia? It is land between two rivers. I know how many different places have emerged as civilization centers. That and all we have studied in our previous chapter. So what is their construction style and what was their architecture? We studied different aspects of Mesopotamians. And Mesopotamia was the ancient most civilization in the world. So after Mesopotamian, the other Bronze Age civilization which is ancient most is this Egyptian civilization. So it happened in the continent Africa. So you might immediately remember when you hear the word Egypt, you will immediately remember the pyramids, right? So by this we can imagine how great this civilization was. So let us go into the chapter and come to understand the details of it now. So trying to understand now the location and origin of Egyptian civilization. Like Mesopotamia, so like if you take modern place of Mesopotamian civilization, it is Iraq, Iran. So similarly, what is the location of this Egyptian civilization? Where exactly this Egyptian civilization flourished? That we will see now. It emerged along the banks of the river Nile. So if you look at the surface of the earth, so this is a satellite image which has been taken, and this is the Nile river. Okay, such a lengthy one. If you see here, this shows the flow of Nile river, and along the banks of this river Nile in about 3150 BCE, the civilization existed. That means along this river Nile, these are all the banks of river Nile. Okay, so along this river Nile, so along the river Nile in 3150 BCE, so these are the banks, and along these banks, a great civilization existed. People went and settled here, and they were responsible for a great civilization. And Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, describes Egypt as gift of Nile. So he is Herodotus, a great historian of Greek, and he calls this, Egypt, where this is all the Egypt. If you look at the place here, this is Egypt in the map. And this Greek historian Herodotus referred Egypt as the gift of the Nile. Because of the river Nile, this place has become very useful for living, and finally it was even helpful in such great civilization. Hence, Herodotus called Egypt as a gift of Nile. The river Nile has gifted a civilization there. It has provided environment for people to settle and flourish with a great civilized living. Hence, Egypt is referred as gift of Nile by a famous Greek historian called Herodotus. And the Nile River rises in Central Africa, flows northwards and drains into Mediterranean Sea. So this is the African continent, and it arises here, it flows. I'll show you here. So the river flows like this, and it goes and joins the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so in this manner, I mean the Egypt is completely dependent on river Nile. There is no river except this river Nile in Egypt, and this river Nile has a lot of uses for the Egyptians. So it origins in the Central African lands, and it goes and joins into the Mediterranean Sea. It flows towards north. See, this is the north, and it joins the Mediterranean Sea here. Every year, the Nile would flood its bank and deposit fertile black soil. So that is, so if the river is flowing like this, and these are the bank, what happens? Every year it floods. That means due to heavy rains and other reasons, floods come to this river. When floods come to this river, what will happen? All the excess water will flow onto the banks. And again, when the flood decreases, the water level decreases, and the sand also, the sand which is brought by, or the soil which is brought by the river, will settle down on the banks. So that soil is called the black soil. So the rivers bring black, the Nile River brings black soil and leave it onto the banks whenever it floods. When the river is flowing and suddenly floods come to that river, the water will flow to the banks. And when water flows to the banks, it carries the soil from river to bank. And that all soil gets deposited on the banks. When that soil is fertile and it is black soil. Okay, that soil which is brought by the flood waters of river Nile is black soil, and it is very fertile. So once it is fertile, what is it useful for? It is useful for agriculture. The resulting fertile land was used for agriculture. As the river water got replenished by rains every year, Egyptians had constant access to fresh water. So every year what happens due to floods and rains, the water gets recycled. The old water will be flowing away, and new water gets into flow with the river. So what happens? This is kind of a replenishment. That means old water leaves and new water comes whenever heavy rains or floods comes. Because of such kind of replenishment due to rains or floods, the water will be always fresh in the Nile River. So which is useful even for drinking purpose, and also irrigation. Irrigation means for agriculture purpose. The river was also used for transport and navigation. So the Egyptians used river Nile for transportation and navigation. Means like, they used to explore new areas by traveling into a river, and from there into ocean, I mean this Mediterranean Sea and all. This enabled the Egyptians to interact with Mediterranean lands and establish trade relations with them. Because of this, you know, river Nile, what happened? They can go through ships, and they can explore new places which are there in the Mediterranean lands. I mean the land which is around Mediterranean Sea. There might be other places also. They had established trade contacts with those places, and they also had a very good, you know, what do you call, drinking water due to this Nile River. Transportation is one thing very easy, and the second thing is they could also establish contacts with other places. The water was full of fish and papyrus weed that provided food and helped in paper making. So along the banks of river Nile, a separate, see, you cannot expect big trees and all to grow. There were a kind of weed. Weed means, it's a not useful thing, and I mean like it's a, they won't give any fruits and all, but it's a weed kind of plant. It grows like a sticks, okay, and these are called papyrus weeds, and they took the bark of this papyrus trees and they make a paper out of it. So Egyptians made paper for the first time through in the history. They were the first people to make paper. The harvest was bountiful, supported by dense forests and cattle rearing. Because of this river Nile, to one part of the Egyptian land there were forests, and also because of the plenty of water availability, agriculture was always good. Crops were very good for them, and cattle also had good water facility. I know many such uses were there because of this only river called Nile. So we have understood that these are the suitable things required for a civilization. Like, Egyptians, why people settled there and why they have why living has become so sophisticated there means because on one end land is fertile, the other end it is used for drinking purpose, the water, and also irrigation purpose. Also trade is possible here. Also they have full of fish which they can eat as well as they can transport. Also these reeds, the weed which is available there called papyrus weed is also useful for paper making. Dense forests are there. So many such things have helped people to start a civilization there. So this is about the location and origin of Egyptian civilization. So the ancient Egypt, okay, or the time during which this civilization has flourished, that Egypt was often understood as two distinct lands. That means if you observe the land around the river Nile, the land is physically differentiated. You can see the land having some differences. The land which is next to the river Nile or to both sides of the river Nile is having some difference. There is a difference in the physical structure of the land. One land is called Kemet and the other land is called desert. Okay, what is this Kemet land and what is this desert land? If you look at this picture here, you can understand the difference. So this is river Nile and to one side it is Kemet and the other side it is desert. So Kemet is a land which is completely black in color because the river Nile always the flood water gets deposited on the banks and all the black soil got deposited here and this soil completely became black and it is very fertile. And the other land is called desert or the red land, referring to the desert on either side of the Kemet. So if this land is Kemet, understood, then this is all desert. Here completely it is red soil, it is sand, you cannot call it a soil because it is sand here and this sand was no, it was like desert here. So Egypt was surrounded by desert and indoors it is having a black soil thing. The deserts surrounding the region acted as natural barriers against infiltration. So suppose if this is Egypt and this is all black soil and this is surrounded by Kemet which is red soil or red sand. This helped people not to enter so easily. So it is not easy for others to enter into this Egyptian place because the deserts and all they don't provide any source to live or no. It is very difficult for people to travel in desert and and come and occupy this place. So desert or the desert helped in a huge way for Egyptians to live in isolation. That means they are not in they are not ruled by any others because of which this desert area. It served as a natural barrier. This allowed Egyptian society to develop in isolation, not mixed up by anybody. So they developed on their own. The history of ancient Egypt can be divided into three phases: Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. So the history of Egyptian civilization can be studied in three phases: Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. There are certain differences why they have been called as Old, Middle, and Ancient. I mean New Kingdom. There is a unique features for every phase. In that particular ancient phase, there were some kind of systems and practices. Middle phase, there is one kind of system and practices. New, it's completely different. So hence, these three kingdoms that were available were old, middle, and new. And this was, for our understanding, it was divided like this by historians. Of course, there are different kind of features that differentiates them, but to our understanding, old, middle, and new kingdoms were there. I mean, they were responsible for Egyptian. They contribute to the Egyptian civilization more. So we just now discussed that the Egyptians civilization has been divided into ancient, middle, and modern kingdoms. Let us have an understanding of how the early Egyptians lived. The early Egyptian settlements were divided into parts, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. So if you look at the map here, this is the parts of Lower Egypt and these are the parts of Upper Egypt. Okay, so you may get doubt here. You're showing this thing in upper area and you're calling it as Lower Egypt, and this is you're calling it as Upper Egypt and it is down. That's not the thing here. So why do you think this is called Lower Egypt and this is called Upper Egypt? Because the river Nile flows from central India to north, right? So it goes towards north. Hence, this becomes the upper part and this becomes the lower part for the river. The settlements at the beginning part of the river were hence referred as Upper Egypt, and the settlements at the end part of the river Nile were referred as Lower Egypt. Despite having much in common, especially in terms of culture and religious beliefs, two lands were at war with each other. So the Lower Egypt and Upper Egyptian settlements, culturally, as well as belief system or their religion, everything was similar, but still they are always at war with each other for the places. Okay, they want more land under their control. So these two areas were constantly under fights with each other, and King Narmer unified the two lands in 310 BCE. So he is King Narmer. If you look at the picture here, he is King Narmer, and this king has unified these two lands. So not physically, that these two lands were together called as Egypt after his rule. And when he conquered Lower Egypt and facilitated the emergence of a unified Egypt, so he belongs to the upper region and he went and conquered completely the Lower Egypt. And thus he united these two Egypts and together call it as Egypt. Earlier it was referred as Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. I told you why it is Lower Egypt, why it is Upper Egypt. Now King Narmer, this person, he unified these two places by conquering the Lower Egypt. And the rulers of Egypt were referred to as pharaohs. Okay, the rulers were referred as pharaohs. And the pharaonic rule began with King Narmer and ended with the death of Cleopatra. So the pharaoh rule, or the king who ruled Egypt for the first time, was Narmer, and the last queen to rule Egypt was Cleopatra. Okay, she was a woman. I mean, she was a woman who ruled, and that was the first and the last rulers of Egypt. And who was this Pharaoh? The Pharaoh was given the status of God on earth. The Egyptians, they consider pharaohs as gods, representatives, or they themselves are the gods on earth. They consider their kings as gods on earth. They also assume the position of supreme priest of every temple. So in Egyptian civilization, there are even temples, and we'll see, in course of lesson, we will see what is their religion, how they, what kind of gods they worshipped and all. So the king or pharaoh is referred as the chief priest. Who is a priest? A priest is somebody who prays near the god, right? In a temple, if you go, the priest will do all the kind of rituals to God. So this king is served as chief priest of every temple, and they also consider the people, normal people, they were given the status of a god on earth by people. They built their personal treasury by accepting gifts and valuable items from all areas under their control. So these pharaohs, what they did, this is a very important point, they accepted gifts from people, and they accepted even some kind of valuable items from people, and they all store these valuable gifts and items in a treasury. It is within the king's palace, where they keep all the treasure gifts and the other kind of valuable items that kings get. You can Think this as a foundation step for collection of taxes. Initially, taxes were just, initially the kings were received gifts from people as a mark of respect. No, people used to go meet the king. They give whatever they have, valuable things and all. Slowly, this system has evolved into a compulsory thing, and kings started demanding the things, and they collected the things as a taxes. So, this is about the Egyptian settlements in the beginning days. So, we have been talking about the pharaohs, right? Pharaohs are the kings. So, they are the rulers. They have a highest status, like, they are almost like gods on earth. And these pharaohs enjoy the supreme position. How do you know that they're enjoying that supreme position? They should reflect, right? Yes, by looking at their lifestyle, by looking at their luxurious things, we can understand, yes, they're enjoying a very supreme position. They get the supreme position is reflected in the massive tombs. What do you mean by tomb here? A tomb is a place where a pharaoh's body is kept after his death. So after the death of the king, he'll be placed inside a big, like how bury them. We can call it as a grave. So that big tomb. So you look at this pyramid here, a very big pyramid, right? This is a tomb of a pharaoh. Okay, you can call it this is a grave of a king of Egypt who ruled the Egypt. Such a massive structure they built just for the dead to preserve the dead body of a king. You can imagine the luxuries, the authority they enjoyed those days. Such a massive structure they built in those days because the Egyptians believed in afterlife. So these tombs are called pyramids. The tombs, the structures built for the pharaoh's body to be preserved, is known as pyramids. And why do you think they constructed pyramids? They believed in afterlife. That means, suppose somebody dies, they'll again take birth as some other kind of person. That was a belief that Egyptians had. So, what they did, they believed that if the pharaoh's body was preserved and mummified after death, pharaoh would live forever. So, the Egyptians take the dead body of the king and they keep inside. You can see here the dead body of the king. It was mummified. Mummified means using some herbs and other chemicals. They preserved the body not to get spoiled. No, that I'll discuss later. So they preserved the dead body. You can see here the dead body being preserved inside. This is the inner view of a pyramid. Okay, this is inner view of a pyramid. You can see all his belongings here, the king and his belongings. They kept whatever the king likes. All such things were kept around him, and you know they believed that if king's dead body is preserved like this, with all whatever he likes inside this pyramid, then the king would live forever. And because they believe that they are the gods on earth, so they don't believe them that they will die. If they die, they keep inside a pyramid like this, and they preserve the dead body through mummification by using some herbs and chemicals and applying some kind of things, and they believe that they still are alive. So they buried Pharaoh's body and his belongings inside the pyramid, and they used to feel that yes, these people are having another life. They may take birth again, they may use all the things which are kept for them. Like also they feel they also have belief that they're gods on earth. They don't have death. So even though they physically die, they're still in the form of spirits and all. They'll be having their own. So by all such beliefs, they used to preserve the dead bodies, and you can imagine the magnificent structures they built for these kings. So that shows the grandeur of those people, isn't it? So this is about the introduction of Egyptian civilization, and later we will see the other features of the civilization.